Hello, and welcome to Premier TV. I'm Jill Jacinto, the Digital Platform Manager. Today's Premier Talk, we're joined by Antonis Christidis, a partner here at Mercer. Antonis will take us on a three-part live stream series on the future of work and the evolution of skills. This session will focus on the future of skills and learning. Antonis will share insights from Mercer's and Oliver Wyman's research, Modern Learning in the Digital Era. In the next two sessions, we'll discuss acquisition and talent access and the agile organization and internal marketplaces. And with that, I'd like to thank Antonis for coming on, and I'll turn it over to him. Thank you, Antonis.
Thank you for having me, Jill, and hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. What I would like to do today is share some ideas about a topic that I feel and I think and I know that, there's lots of interest out there. So we thought that, it's a good idea to have this sort of idea setting session today. And it really has to do a little bit about, how skills are evolving and how skills impact jobs. And as a result of the evolution of skills, how could companies consider approaching the learning investment? So there's really four things I will talk about today briefly. One is I will take you through what I call the life cycle of a technical skill. So hopefully that will be interesting. Just think of a specific skill and think how it evolves and then what implications this creates. And as a result of having this on the back of our mind, then I will talk a little bit about how companies we see today approach learning and have new ways of approaching the learning investment, how to decide, what learning modules, curriculums, content should you be focusing on, and eventually how do you distribute that learning platform or that learning environment to your employees? Because of course, just having the right content in place doesn't do much unless the employees actually start utilizing that. So these are the four areas I would like to talk about today. And let me start with the first one, which is what I said before. It's the lifestyle of the life cycle of a technical skill. And to do that discussion, I always use a technical skill that we all are very familiar with, and this is typing. So let's think a little bit about typing, and let's go back maybe 50 years, 60 years, when typing first came to the scene. And just like most other technical skills, when a new technical skill like typing comes to the scene, it does constitute enough, it does provide enough added value for companies to actually turn this technical skill into a job and pay salaries to people because they possess this technical skill. So at the very beginning, when you have the first emergence of a new technical skill like typing, you have a job formed around that skill. And in our case, that job was called the typist. So at the beginning, typing came up. What happened in the process of that is that, things changed and, lots of technology. And eventually around the 70s, you start having, of course, the personal computer coming into our life. And what happened through the personal computer is that technical skill start getting distributed to all members of the workforce. So suddenly it wasn't the few that had this special skill that then got salary for delivering that special skill, but every employee started typing, which very quickly meant that technical skill now had reached its maturity stage. It didn't constitute any longer a competitive advantage. And of course, companies over time stopped employing typists. We're going to come back to this idea and think whether typists eventually got eliminated or evolved into something else. But certainly today, we don't really have typists getting a salary just for typing. And then, of course, after that maturity stage, we are now probably at the very last stages of that phase, comes the decline. So eventually, a technical skill becomes obsolete. And if you think today, let's call it, with Alexa and Google Home and all these devices that we start interacting with technology verbally, you can already see that, 10 years down the road, probably the way we're going to interact with technology, it's not going to be through typing as we do today, which is a dominant way. It will have a different thing. And maybe 10, 15 years down the road, typing will not exist and people will actually not remember what typing was. It will be a skill that nobody actually will need anymore. Why this is important, why having this in mind is important, because as we think of evolution of skills, there is a direct connection of how we think about learning and how we make sure our employees are focused and they are learning the skills we are going to need to be relevant and deliver our products and services in the future. The next thing is there is a timing aspect to this. That's why I use typing, that we have all seen probably all the three phases there. And you see that in the case of typing, that transition happened very organically and over years. What is happening, however, today is that cycle, the three phases I described, are much, I would say, much more violent. It's within a single generation that we're going to see skills rise and skills decline. And unless people have the agility to go and learn and opportunity to learn new skills, they may become irrelevant, let's say, as workers. Not so much a job, but and the third point, which is important to think as we're going to move now to consider a little bit about how does this translate into learning, is that it's not just that this whole process is now happening faster and faster, but as we have technology and the whole AI, let's call it revolution, we can debate if we're still there or it's something to come, but the whole AI notion coming into work, there is a unique situation we never had in the past. And that situation is that AI will, over time, again, it might be a 10-year period, eliminate the transactional layer of jobs. What do I mean by that? If you think back in history, we always had technology replacing jobs. It's not a new situation. But in the very old days, if you imagine somebody being in the fields, in agriculture, basically once machines went in the field and we needed less people in the field, that person could move to a production plan without very significant upskilling requirements. When we automated the production plan, that person could move and become a teller in a supermarket. Again, not very significant upskilling, retraining situation there. But now that we say that probably that whole layer will become replaced by technology, suddenly the only way for people in these jobs will be to find ways to up their added value. And that means a much bigger focus on learning and how we prepare people today for that future. So I spent these first 5 minutes to say this story just to get our thinking around the connection between technical skills, evolution of work, elimination of work, and the speed of how things are picking up today. And not let's go and move into a little bit how do companies approach this today? What do we see lately? Jill referred to a recent paper that we co-authored with colleagues in Oliver Wyman, which we called Modern Learning. And in there, we examine how some companies approach learning these days. And I would say that the first notion I would like to lay out there is this notion of employer-led versus employee-led learning. If you think traditionally, work-related learning was to a large extent or to 100% employer-led. You had a job, and because of your job, your employer had set up certain training curriculum you should do, and and every now and then you had an email or you would be invited in a classroom and you would do certain trainings that align to your career level or to your job. This is employer-led learning, and it's still relevant, but it's probably not enough in the days of faster evolution that I was describing before. And as the evolution is faster and faster, what we see these days is a lot of companies starting to experiment by what we now call employee-led learning, where the focus of the employer, I would say, is not so much in making sure these employees do this training, but the focus of the employer is making sure that we have availability of the right learning content and the right means to learn. And I'm going to come back to this later in this discussion. And then employees independently make choices about what they want to learn and how they want to navigate that environment. So where in the past, I would say learning was very much linked to your job and to a functional idea of how careers look like, today we see more and more learning be linked to personal aspirations and broad career choices, redeployment, moving into other areas. Of course, it has to be underpinned by the business of where your employer sits. I mean, you don't want your people to be learning completely unrelated topics to what you do. And that's why the role of the employer now is to more set a framework, but then create the right currency for employees to navigate and, based on their aspirations, go where they want to go. So then the natural question is, how do you set then the framework? How do you know what do we need to be learning if this is no longer directly linked to the jobs? Because you know what jobs you have today, you know what skills these jobs require, and you can, of course, create learning courses to match those skills. That's a very linear and straightforward situation. But the moment we start saying things are changing, and that chain maybe is not enough, because if you just do that, you don't really prepare for the future. How do we know how to, what else will we need? The way we generally approach this when we work with our clients is we have 3 steps in this process. The first step is we always try to build what we call a skills inventory. We try to understand what is the baseline of skills that exist today within the organization. And we do this in 2 ways. And I would say combining these 2 ways is equally important. If you do one or the other, you're not going to get in a complete answer. The first way is by analyzing the current job inventory. So as I said before, there's a direct link between the jobs you have and the skills you require to do these jobs. So if you understand what jobs you have, we can actually create an inventory of what skills do this job require. So we look at this organizational layer because it shows us, how do we best, service our operating model. Our jobs are a function of the operating model. However, that's not enough, because it's, of course, very true that as an employee, I may have a job, but my personal skill set may be above this job or sometimes even below. That's a problem in other ways, but you see what I'm saying. So the second layer we always look at is also the employee-based assessment. So what skills our individual employees have, and very often there's interesting surprises there, because today with, the massive online open learning courses, edX and Coursera and all these platforms, it's very interesting how our employees are picking up new skills outside of the work-related skills outside of the work area, and also, without us as employers know that they have the skills. So suddenly you have somebody who may be sitting in finance and recently completed a machine learning course from MIT. Is this a person who would like to keep in finance, redeploy somewhere else? Do we, have these interesting dynamics? Now, when you combine the 2, the job-based and the employer-based, you start understanding, what's the real baseline. What do we need as an organization today? What is available below or above in our workforce today? The next thing that we, of course, then do is try to take that current skills inventory and try to imagine, and I use the word imagine because there is some imagination process happening in there, how this will look into the future. And generally, we look at 3 things there. We'll try to look at your current business strategy of how your leadership have developed the business to evolve, and translate this into how your value chain will change. Let me say, if you're a bank today, the way banking worked 20 years ago is already different to today, and the way it will work in 20 years from now, it will be different to today. So how does this change the way the company creates value, and as a result, what jobs does this create? The second thing, of course, is the broader industry evolution that's going on. And the third thing is, other external trends, lifestyle, technology, and legislation. So when we analyze these 3 parameters, we then shape this future skills inventory that shows us, it has, of course, hints from the current, what we need today, because the business will not completely be different. But it also starts identifying new areas that are not core today, but they will be core in the future. What happens, of course, then is we compare the 2 and we try to understand how different they look. Sometimes they look very different. Sometimes they look not so different. The output of this exercise helps us both understand what are the core skills of today we have to maintain moving forward, and we shouldn't look back, because if somebody just has a future mindset, the risk is you miss your current business. And as I said before at the beginning of this discussion or presentation, that evolution is organic. It doesn't happen one day to the next. So it's important we keep our eyes on the core side of the business, but also it starts identifying new areas that we probably need to establish courses, content, infrastructure for our people to start, expanding the skills towards. Which gets us to the last, let's say, core question we usually explore in this type of situations of when we work with evolution of skills and learning, which is, all right, now that we have identified what has to be learned and what content is there and how we're going to do all that, how do we actually make this work? I usually call this, how do we distribute? What is the distribution channel we use? And then there's three things we always look up there. The first one is, of course, the learning environment. So traditionally, we had classroom training, or we had, training delivered through a learning management system, typically desktop, typically of certain characteristics. It's clear that today, companies and the leaders in this space are looking to meet their employees wherever they are. This means that it's a much more diverse delivery system. It's anything from mobile. It's, of course, still classroom training because, of course, emotional connections made in the physical world are very important when we talk about upskilling, or even more importantly, reskilling employees. But then we have, of course, mobile, we have just in time, we have desktop. And the whole idea is that this, when we do it the right way, it's what we call in consumer goods the omni-channel approach. All of these channels actually integrate and work as one. So you can start something here, continue there. It's a seamless consumer type of experience that we try to build through our learning environment. The second area we look at is we want to clarify the currency. So if we go with what I was discussing before, this employee-led approach, so the employee has access to this interesting environment that I'm describing, and now they have to make choices. Now we have to clarify what is the currency, how do we distribute? Do they have credits, for example, that they can allocate, like they would go in the open market and buy courses themselves? Is it linked to, let's say, you're a high potential or something else? Is it linked that you're sitting in a hot job or not? What is the currency? Usually what we see these days, we see a lot the use of credits. We see a lot of companies translating the old training budget into credits, allocating the credits to employees, providing them access to the environment, and then telling them, okay, now you can go and spend your credits according to your personal career aspirations and broad career choices. The third thing is the most important, and it's something, again, that I don't think we used to do a lot in the older days, but it's probably becoming, and I think it's good to say that I see many companies these days who spend equal or even more focus on that third parameter, and that's the marketing parameter. So now imagine if you follow the story I delivered, we have figured out that, we're going to do employee-led and employer-led. We're going to, we have figured out the right content. We have developed the right technology to do that. We have created the environment for employees to go and access all that. The question is, do our employees understand why it is important to actually go and learn? Or we just hope that they will? Because if we just hope they will, there's a big chance they will not, because of course our employees probably already work very long hours and they don't really have extra time just to spend on additional things unless they understand the urgency. So the third parameter is the marketing campaign. Just like when we launch a new product in the market, we always accompany this new product with a marketing campaign so consumers know what to expect and where to find. The same thing actually we should be doing always with especially this type of initiatives, because it's so important. I mean, if employees don't understand the importance and they don't place the effort, there's a big chance, if I go back where I started, that they will become the typist, which if you think of the typist that I was speaking in the beginning, the typist job was not really eliminated. The typist job actually evolved into what we now call personal assistants, and personal assistants do way more things than just typing. But if somebody in the old job, said, I came to this planet just to type, that's my mission on the planet, of course, that worker probably got eliminated, was not able to adjust to the new environment. So as long as we sign into this premise that jobs keep evolving, there's a constant evolution of jobs. It's really whether we as people and employees can keep adjusting. Now, as long as we subscribe that, it's our job to tell this story to our employees. So first of all, it's our job to set up the right environment and a high quality learning environment, but also explain to them why it is important they use it. And when we have both parameters there, then things will happen. Our employees will start accessing, will start picking up new skills. They will start having different views about their careers, and the evolution of our employees will actually lead to the evolution of our business itself. So it's equally a learning, personal, and business transformation story that eventually comes together when we do this the right way. I'll stop here. I mean, that's a significant download. very quickly summarize, we started by talking about one single technical skill and how, different phases look like and what implication it creates. We touched a little bit about the approach, employer-led, employee-led. Then we went to talk about how do we actually decide content, current skills inventory, future inventory, and how do they connect. And eventually we went to discuss about distribution. How do we actually put all this in the hands to our employees? Jill, if you have any comments or any questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Thank you, Antonis. Wow, that was such a powerful discussion, and really understanding how evolution is so important when it comes to an employee and how it can really impact the business's bottom line is truly transformational in terms of that example of the typist transforming into the PA, and how you really do need to pivot when you're thinking about the evolution of jobs and always be looking forward into change and how your role is going to grow. So thank you. Really appreciate you sharing this insight with us. And for those of you tuning in, know that you can read this research on the Premier platform, the Modern Learning in the Digital Era. If you have any questions for Antonis, please include them in the chat below, and he's happy. Antonis, I'm throwing this to you, but he's happy to answer any questions that you might have after listening to this discussion and reading that research. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Premier TV, where global perspectives are delivered by leading experts. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and encourage you to continue the discussion by adding your thoughts and questions in the comment thread. Log into the Premier platform next month to watch the next 2 sessions in this series, Acquisition and Talent Access, and the Agile Organization and Internal Work Marketplaces. And again, you can access all episodes of Premier TV directly on the Premier platform. Thank you again, Antonis.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.